Thank you, David, and hello, everybody, and welcome tonight to our presentation. We are very happy to have you here for Hiking Safely, Hiking Smartly, and I'm going to be telling you a little bit about that in just a second. Just as an introduction, I've been a member of the Crescenta Valley Group for more than 30 years. Currently, I am the program chair, but our group also organizes day hikes, night hikes, week-long trips, both nationally and internationally, and community events like our recent community tree mulching event, which was held last Saturday in Sunland. We also do educational and informational webinars like this one that you're here for tonight, which all deal with eco-friendly activities, awareness of local wildlife, better ways to prepare for local hikes, and many other interesting subjects. So tonight's webinar is called Hiking Safely, Hiking Smartly, Tips from Expert Hikers on how to prepare for the most common issues that can lead to tragedy. And we're going to be doing a question and answer session with our panelists, who are members of the Wilderness Training Course of the Sierra Club, and also members of Montrose Search and Rescue, as well as my co-moderator, David Eisenberg of the Verdugo Hills group of the Sierra Club. Each of our panelists will shed light on specific problems that they most often see that lead to injuries or the need for rescue, and how to avoid them by just being better prepared. So as we get into better weather, we are going to see an increase in people getting lost, injured, or stranded somewhere where they didn't expect to need to be rescued. And we're going to hopefully prevent some of those with this presentation tonight. And by the way, our last presentation, which on this similar subject, was last April. And I did receive an email from one of the people who participated as just a member of the listening audience. And she told me that as a result of listening to our webinar, she and her husband were better prepared. And when her husband slipped and fell and plunged 30 feet down a cliff, they knew what to do, and that this likely saved their life. So this is serious business, and we hope you'll take good notes. I want to tell you about a book I read last year, which kind of led me to want to do this presentation. And it was called When You Find My Body. And it was written in 2019 by Dee Dauphiné. It was about the disappearance of 66-year-old Jerry Largay, who disappeared 2 years previous to the book being written on a remote section in Maine of the Appalachian Trail. Unfortunately, after an ongoing search for more than a month by different search and rescue well-trained people, they weren't able to find her. And that is until October 14th, 2015, 2 full years later after she disappeared. 2 contractors who were performing an environmental survey in the 4,000-foot Redington Range in Maine literally stumbled upon her collapsed tent in a heavily wooded area. And that was how they found her. In this book, When You Find My Body, it really gives you specific accounts of what happened leading up to her disappearance, and also her journal entries. She kept journal entries while she was there in her tent, and she wrote about what she had done and what led to her getting lost. So, you learn from other people's mistakes, and that's important that we have books like these. So, while that didn't relate to the Angeles Forest, there's many rescues going on, and many of them in the Angeles Forest that we're probably going to hear about tonight in our presentation. So with that, I'm going to start with Montrose Search and Rescue, and I'm going to pose the first question to Doug Cramoline, and that is, in 2021, how many search and rescues did you have? And was it higher than previous years? And do you see any trends that have developed? And also, please tell us how many of those search and rescues were fatalities.
Sure. Thank you, Pat. My name is Doug Krameline. I'm the team leader for Montrose Search and Rescue. We're based out of the Crescenta Valley Sheriff Station, and we're one of 8 sheriff rescue teams in Los Angeles County. I always defer to Mark Twain on the matter of statistics. There's lies, damn lies, and statistics. So they're not always telling the whole picture, but I'll tell you what we have. In 2021, we had a total of 138 calls. 2020 was 162 calls. It seemed like we were busier in 2021. I think some of the calls were more substantial in terms of the time required and the severity. So I think the statistics don't tell the whole story. Of those 138 calls, 79 were non-injury, 50 were injuries, and we had 14 fatalities, compared with 2020, which were 92 instances of non-injury and 50 injuries with 18 fatalities. One metric that I kind of enjoy tracking is in 2021, we had 2 dog rescues, and in 2020, there were 5 dog rescues. So things remain fairly steady. Looking back on our statistics, they range from back in 2017, we had 128 calls, and then we have, of course, the high call was, well, not of course, but we had high calls of 147 in 2019. So they've ranged, they've tended to increase depending on various factors, including the environmental situations such as fires, which tend to increase our calls because they wipe out the trail signage, and sometimes the trails, people try to follow the, a trail that they have on their map or an app if they have one, and they'll discover the trail just isn't there. So that causes them to be lost. In terms of the whole county, there's been a gradual increase in all the teams, and I think that covers some buffering of the conditions that are specific to each area. For example, the Bobcat fire increased calls, the station fire certainly after that, and was it 29, I think it was, that we had a great increase after that. But for the county, in 2015, there were 684 calls amongst all the teams. In 2020, which is the last period I was able to find, it was up to 886. So it has increased generally over time. The trend, I think, is we are getting more calls that are not involving a search so much, in that we have, due to technology, a pretty good idea of where the person is located. And therefore, it's a matter of getting to them, knowing their location. That greatly simplifies the call. Also, it allows for more helicopter rescue access from the fire department and the sheriff's department. So that's what I have pretty much on the statistics and trends. You have any questions on that, Pat?
Thank you. No, that was really informative. Thank you, Doug. I appreciate that. So that was the rescue stats. Now we're going to talk about preparation. So Steve Goldsworthy, I have 2 questions for you. We have both extreme heat and very cold temperatures in our Angeles forest. What would you recommend to hikers to avoid the most common issues that people face and are not prepared for? And also, what technology would you suggest that hikers always bring with them?
Thanks, Pat. So planning a hike is, goes beyond trying to figure out what kind of shoes you should wear, although that's important. The night before, you really need to be planning the hike. You need to be telling someone where you're going, what your intended route is, when you're going to be back, preferably more than one person if that person's not reliable. You need to bring the 10 essentials. And I know Lisa's going to talk specifically about those. But in reality, when we look back at serious injuries or people who were lost for an extended period and fatalities, we see that same thing over and over again, that they're not bringing just the basics that could save a life. Well, we had 2 hikers lost in a similar area, and one happened to bring a sweatshirt, even though he was wearing shorts. And 2.5 days later, he survived where the other person didn't. So something as simple as some extra clothing can really make a difference. So I think first and foremost, it's planning. We'll talk about hydration going on, but people don't hydrate in the cold weather. It's just sort of not something they think about doing, but the humidities are very low in cold weather. And, just your respiratory system breathing, you can both sweat and lose a lot of water, through your body. So it's just as important to hydrate. And we see that in both extremes, both, cold weather as well as certainly in the hot weather, just not enough hydration. The amount of water that you need to carry is almost mind-boggling if you're going to go out in, super hot temperatures and try and climb a mountain. The fact is, there are better things to do when it's 100 degrees out. And that's really our number one recommendation is there's no reason to be out there in 100-degree weather trying to climb, a peak that has a southern exposure that has no trees. And Strawberry Peak comes to mind. And every year, I guarantee you in the summer times, we're going to have 4 or 5 heat-related rescues on Strawberry Peak. We just see the same mistakes, being made over and over again. And as far as the go-to, a cell phone is nice. A cell phone works some of the time. But most of us carry, some sort of personal satellite communications, whether that's inReach or a Spot. And it's something that, I personally promote as much as I can. It's well worth the money, regardless of which technology you choose. They're all very similar in that, they're going to put out a call for help in an area where it may be your only, option. It may be the only way you can contact the outside world and get help. So I know Lisa's got some pictures. So when people are at REI or somewhere, they can put 2 and 2 together. But that's what I would carry. And that's what I do carry on a personal hike.
Steve, could you tell us a little bit about your title and your background with Montrose Search and Rescue?
Yeah, so I've been on the team now, I think about 11 years since I started. And I started there in a little different capacity by basically helping them out with some technology things. And I also serve as the technology director for search and rescue for LA Sheriff's for all 8 teams. And so, there's a lot of technologies that just change the way we do things. And a recent example is the Mount Pino search, within maybe an hour or so of getting a call for a missing hiker. We didn't know where in Southern California that this individual was going. And within an hour or so, we were able to get those cell phone records and hone right in and, send the unit to a parking lot, verify his car was there. 2-3 hours later, the search is on. And, that's technology that we certainly didn't have 20 years ago. Anyway, so.
And fortunately, he was found alive too.
He walked out, I think about a day and a half later.
That's amazing. Thank you, Steve. So Lisa Miyake is with the Wilderness Training Course of the Sierra Club. She's one of the trainers. Lisa, do you have any tips on how hikers can best prepare for the cold months and the hotter months? And what equipment would you recommend? And also tell us, how much weight does it add to one's backpack?
Absolutely. So hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Miyake. I am an instructor with the Wilderness Travel Course out of the Long Beach, South Bay area, Group 3. I have been instructing for like the past 11 years. And so I wanted to share with you kind of the framework that we teach, some of the tools and the materials that you should bring with you when going on a hike. So let me share my screen real quick. Just want to confirm with someone, Pat, can you verify that you see the 10 essentials? Excellent. Okay. So I want to answer Pat's question in the framework of the 10 essentials. Essentially, when you're going out in the hotter months and the colder months, what should you be bringing with you? And so kind of to that point, let's start with hydration. When it comes to hot months, obviously, and cold months, frankly, but when it comes to hot months especially, you want to make sure you're carrying more than enough water for your trip. So, excuse me, what you might typically bring 2 liters, but decide to bring 3 because you know that buys you extra margin. What extra water means in this context also means you could bring like a filter, drops, or tablets to clean the water that you expect to encounter on the trail, or maybe slightly off trail, but there's a water source, and you could clean the water and drink it. But if you're in a scenario where you're succumbing to heat exhaustion, or possibly leaning towards heat stroke, then you should still drink water if it's an option. So let's say you encounter a stream, but you don't have your filter with you. Drink the water, because whatever diseases or what have you that you could pick up from the water, take a bit of time to kind of like actually become a problem in your body. So drink the water, address the immediate need of dehydration and heat exhaustion first, and then get out. If you're in town and you did pick up something, you could go see medical services there. Also make sure that if you're in an emergency scenario where, again, you're completely dehydrated and out of water, make sure you drink all the water you have. There have been instances where people have been found unfortunately they've passed away, but they still had water in the pack because they were kind of trying to like ration it out. But that doesn't really help you, obviously, at the end if you didn't drink the water. So drink the water and use that extra energy to hopefully kind of think through where you're at and hopefully get yourself out. This is a kind of a more straightforward answer in terms of, make sure you have sun protection on when you're going out in a hotter month. Hats and sleeves obviously help mitigate some sun exposure, but also having things like sunscreen and sunglasses will definitely protect your skin and eyes. And I just want to make a quick comment here about sunglasses aren't just for hot months in the summer. It's also if you're going out in the winter and there's snow, the sun, basically reflects off the snow, is actually like almost magnified in terms of its brightness. So when you're on snow and there's sun being reflected on that, there's these things called glacier glasses or glacier goggles that you want to use to minimize any kind of sun getting in your eyeball or in your eyes so that you can prevent snow blindness. For cold months, layering is key. So you want to have extra clothing, but it's not just any kind of extra clothing. You want, basically the rule that we have is no cotton. So you want material that wicks. You don't want heavy cotton on you that you wear, and then as you start warming up, you sweat because it won't dry off. You need it to wick so that it actually dries off if you do sweat in it. But you also want to layer. So you don't necessarily want to take your heavy snowboarding jacket with you as your backup extra clothing. You want layers so that you can adjust to the heat or cold appropriately. So you don't ever overheat while you're working, while you're moving. And then when it's time to actually warm up at the end of the day, you can wear all your layers. So layering is key in this scenario in terms of having the right insulation with you in the cold time of year. And then also have some form of rain gear on you. Even if it's only 10% chance of rain today when you're going out, maybe tomorrow it's up to 30 or 40. And if you do get in a scenario where you do, get stuck out overnight, are you prepared for that? And so having even just basic rain gear to cover you in that scenario is pretty critical so that you don't become hypothermic in that scenario. Fire, this is pretty self-explanatory. If you do get in a situation where you're, you have to overnight it, having things like a fire source and a fire starter to help build you a fire will help keep you warm in the event that you do have to sleep out. Emergency shelter is also very important in terms of having a way to keep warm. Additional clothing, having a fire and emergency shelter will also keep you warm. Something like a bivy sack or an emergency blanket can help in that scenario in case you do sleep out. And a quick note on that, in addition to having that bivy sack, make sure if you do get in a scenario where you sleep out, and I've done it once, you want to have something underneath you. So let's say you have a sit pad, you have your backpack, put that stuff underneath you and then bivy on top of it, because then it adds an extra layer between your body and the ground and helps just give you that little extra margin of warmth. Nutrition, actually, you might not necessarily think of it as like how to keep warm, like a tool to keep you warm, but basically it can. Eating, particularly like proteins and fats, can help you generate heat and stay warm, so you could eat, eat if you're getting cold and have your body, work. And then also things like, running in place and just kind of moving around. You could take actions. It's not just about having the stuff with you, but you could take actions to keep yourself warm in the event that you're out in a colder month and get stuck. last but not least, we have, repair kits and tools could help in terms of fixing things that you had to keep yourself warm that maybe fell apart. So maybe your jacket got torn up or your bivy sack. I've had this where my boots tore up the bottom of my bivy sack, and some duct tape would, pretty much cover that up and make it warmer. So having the repair kit and tools to help fix things if things do break will help you address emergency scenarios or overnight scenarios. Also, on the topic of tools, make sure you have the right gear for the terrain that you're going to encounter. And this is, especially the case for snow and, during the colder months. Do you have, if it's icy, do you have an ice axe, crampons, a helmet to be able to travel that terrain? Those are very important tools to have, especially in the colder months where you might encounter snow. And then Pat, to your question of how much does it all weigh, it really depends on the person and what they're bringing. So, something quantifiable is like, let's say you decide to bring that extra liter of water. So you have 3 liters instead of 2. Each liter of water is about 2 pounds. So that's, easily measurable. But some of the other materials that I mentioned, it really depends on what you end up buying. Like oftentimes you end up paying more for, a nice thinner down jacket, or not a thinner down jacket, but just a lighter weight down jacket, which might provide just as much warmth as like a really thick fleece. And you just got to figure out, what your tolerance is for cost, but also make sure that you have all the gear that you need and, at a weight that you're comfortable with. So if you buy these tools that I mentioned, but ultimately they're just too heavy for you, then you're going to leave them behind and you're not going to take them with you, which makes them ineffective. So, definitely these are good tools to have, but figure out what works for you, figure out a kit that works for you so that you could go out in colder months and hotter months and still be comfortable while traveling.
Thank you very much. That brought to mind in that story I was just telling you, and When You Find My Body, the woman who disappeared, Jerry Largate, had a compass with her, but it was this big. It was one of those souvenir compasses that, don't do anything. And that was the kind of compass that she had on her backpack, which she didn't also know how to use. So thank you very much for listing the 10 essentials. It's always good to just hear them over and over again. You can never hear it enough. So I'm going to move on to the next question. That's going to be for Janet Henderson, and this is on getting lost. And Janet, if someone does get lost, what should they do? And what are the most common misconceptions that people have? And also, what areas do you see the most rescues in our foothills and mountains?
Hi, Pat. Okay, to start with, what happens when you get lost? Many years ago when I started on the team and we used to do PRs for Boy Scouts and the Cub Scouts groups and all that, it was called Hug a Tree. And what we taught the kids was that if you got lost or separated from your group, we just want you to stop and sit down at the nearest tree. And someone is going to turn around and come looking for you. And I think one of the big misconceptions that people have when they get lost is they're going to be able to find their way out, or they're going to be able to pick up their cell phone and they're going to be able to get some, connection to somebody that can come help them. But, it couldn't be further from the truth in the mountains. Like Steve has already pointed out, cell reception up there is very spotty and you would be lucky to get it. So I think one of the best things that people can do if they were to get lost on the trail or go off the trail is just to sit down and, cop a squat, like they say, and just wait for somebody to come. They're going to turn around and they're going to come find you. And we've had many searches that we've been on where people thought, oh, I can just get my way down. And it's turned into week-long searches, or it's turned into fatalities for the victim because they thought they could walk down to the city lights going off the edge of the mountain and, resulted in their death. So I think the best thing that someone could do is just sit down and someone's going to come back and retrace their steps and find you.
Okay. Another question. Could you give us a little of your background with Montrose Search and Rescue?
I have been with Montrose Search and Rescue now. I think I just hit 27 years in February. Have my profession is an emergency room nurse, so I kind of married my two passions. And I think that's about it. I don't know.
Okay, now I have another question. If someone is getting a blister and they do not have moleskin packed in their first aid kit, can they use duct tape?
I do it all the time.
Perfect. So Lisa's solution, repair tools can also help you if you're getting a blister, because a blister can take you out also
Yes.
if you're hiking.
Yes.
Something so small and seems so insignificant can really cause someone to just not be able to hike anymore.
Right.
Now, is there a specific area that you see a lot of injuries in our foothills or in our Angeles Forest?
It's hard to say that there's a specific area that we see more of one injury versus another. Of course, we see our motorcycle accidents all over the highway. Some of our biggest searches, though, I would say in just the recent years are probably up towards the Waterman area or maybe the Buckhorn area going up to Antelope Valley.
Steve, do you want to chime in on that? I see you nodding your head.
Yeah, I was just agreeing with Janet. The 3 large searches that we had last year that were multi-day searches were all in the Mount Waterman area. And we just had a search for 2 girls missing from Torrance a few months back, and that was in the Buckhorn area. And so, yeah, that's a very common area to get turned around. And it really goes to the importance of telling someone what your plans are, because we find the car parked at the trailhead and there's 4 or 5 trails that go 5 directions. And so we really, even though we have a good starting point, we really don't know where to focus. And so it takes a lot of resources to search a mountain the size of Mount Waterman and the Buckhorn area. Narrowing it down, that's good, but it's still going to take 5 or 6 teams to really search that area. So yeah, that's definitely, a hot spot, or at least it was last year.
May I
To
add
add
to
to that,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes.
I'm sorry, everybody was kind of jumping in at the same time, but to add to that, like Steve said before, with all the recent fires we have and how they destroy the trails and, trees tumble and rocks tumble and it destroys the trail, and people will go online and say, oh, I'm just going to look up this trail and look where it goes and it's going to be really easy. But you might not be aware that trail is no longer in existence. It might be just wiped out from fires and flood and overgrowth. So that, I think, is another misconception, that you can just look up a trail online and you're going to say, hey, I'm just going to go out for a day hike and it's going to be okay.
Doug, did you want to add something?
Really the same thing that Janet said, and I'll add even to that. Many of those areas were closed at the time people were hiking due to the Bobcat fire, and they either didn't know that or ignored it and went anyway. And the trails were virtually wiped out. So even we had difficulty trying to find the trail and find the access points that these people used. So a lot depends on the current conditions. And again, echoing Janet, just checking your all trails or other sources isn't always enough. You have to have really current information.
So the lesson here is to read signs and know that if there's a sign posted, there's a reason why it was posted.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So now we're going to go back to Lisa. Your thoughts on misconceptions on getting lost, and also any technology that you would recommend.
Absolutely. So I think to Janet's points, like ideally you're staying found, right? Ideally, you never get in a situation where you're lost, where you know generally where you are on a map, or even a GPS device. That is kind of obviously ideal state. But staying found isn't just about you knowing where you are. I think it's partly about other people knowing where you potentially are in the event something happens. So Doug and I were talking about this earlier today. Sometimes it's just about letting people know where you're going, what your planned route is, and your expected return time, so that in the event that you don't return at your expected time, they could reach out to search and rescue or emergency contacts on your behalf, and then provide that critical information so that you can be found. But again, to Janet's point earlier, if you do get lost, definitely don't panic. like take a moment, right? Take care of yourself, get some water, get some food, adjust your clothing so that you're comfortable, so that your head is in the right space when you're kind of then trying to think through, when was the last time you were out and where was that? Is it even possible to get there? And kind of just think through how you got yourself in that scenario and if and how you can get yourself out. There are definitely a couple of schools of thought in terms of, what you should do at that point. If help is coming, like someone knows, that you're supposed to be home and you're not, and so help is likely coming, or if you've obviously communicated to SARA on via phone or your satellite communicator or PLB, something like that, then you should stay in a safe and visible, space, right? You want to be visible to SARA when they come looking for you, especially if you activate a PLB or a satellite communicator and you give them your coordinates. Like, don't move around afterwards. That doesn't make sense because they're not going to find you. But then there's also the other side of, okay, so one, maybe let's say you're hiking alone and no one is looking for you because you forgot to tell folks that you are going to be out. Or, you have the skills and tools needed to actually figure out where you are, could you leverage those? So, as part of WTC, we teach how to use a map and compass so that even if you are lost in the moment, you could look at cues in the field, whether it's the terrain, whether it's, peaks nearby, and pinpoint where you're at. And if you actually can do that, perhaps you are no longer lost, you're actually found on a map at least, and then you can get yourself out. And then, there's what some folks call like an 11th essential in terms of having some sort of technical device. Steve referred to it earlier. I'll address it a little bit more in a minute, but these technical devices could definitely help in terms of helping with either a self-rescue or a rescue scenario. So for self-rescue, if you have a phone with a mapping application and it's actually working, you have enough battery power and your GPS is actually working on it, you might be able to locate yourself on a phone mapping app. Or if you have a personal locator beacon, another a tech device that could actually help you, contact SAR, then that could help in rescue. Obviously, in this case, it's not self-rescue, search and rescue is coming out to get you. And that helps too in terms of obviously if you're lost. But I definitely recommend against like being 100% dependent on technological devices, but they can certainly help. And so you give me a minute, I will share my screen. Sorry, just because I have some visual aids to help with this. Sorry, give me a minute. Can we see my screen again? It's still 10 essentials. Perfect. Okay. So next slide. Perfect. Okay. So Steve referred to it a little bit, and I wanted to provide some like visual examples of some of the items he was referring to, so that if you do want to go online or to a store and actually look at these items and see if they're appropriate for you and your kit, you could go ahead and do so. So first, the first item I'm going to refer to is the PLB, or the personal locator beacon. And the one I have here is the ACR Electronics Rescue Me. The pros of this, if you will, there's no subscription fee. That's the big one. So you buy it once and it works. You don't have to pay a monthly fee for it to function for you when you're out in the field. It does use a dedicated SAR satellite network, which is operated by SARSAT, and that works like around the world. So it's obviously on a satellite network that's dedicated to rescues, which is good. It also has a 7-year shelf life with no recharging necessary. So once you have it, it's good for 7 years. I think at that point you have to figure out if you want to replace the battery, which costs a fair amount, or just want to get a new one, depending on how old the model is. But it has a 7-year shelf life regardless. And then it's also waterproof up to 15 meters. So you might see this more in a maritime environment as well. Some boats use it because it has better waterproof ability than some other devices. The other one that categorically another communicator, if you will, or a rescue device, is the satellite communicator. So, Steve mentioned Spot. There's also the Garmin. This is the InReach Mini 2. And for this one, there's a subscription fee. And so there is some, monthly cost to it in addition to buying the original device. It does allow for two-way messaging, which is pretty nice. So you actually know that your messages have gone through and you're communicating. Whereas with the ACR, it's just a one-way signal. that you need help and you technically don't know if it was received. The inReach also has like interactive SOS alerts and location sharing, and it uses the global Iridium satellite network, so it's on a different network. The battery life is not, multiple years. It's up to 30 days if it's on at a low setting. And I think if it's been off for, I think, a year, it still kind of works. But after that, you have to charge it again. So you can't just pick it up and go. You have to make sure it's charged. Also, it only withstands a little bit of water. It's like 1 meter for up to 30 minutes. So it's not as waterproofable and not as versatile in a maritime environment. So those are kind of like categorically the two different options. There are PLBs and satellite communicators. And I think it's just a matter of what your tolerance is for cost and what you want. If you want to be able to text with your family or message your family, the inReach Mini is going to be a better fit for you. If you want just the one-time cost option, the PLB is probably better. Frankly, when my partner and I go in on these outings, like we bring one each because they use different satellite networks. So it has some redundancy there in terms of safety and being able to communicate with SAR. The next thing I'll talk about, so just as a caveat, I work in the tech industry by day and I do this stuff for fun. So that's why I kind of nerd out a little bit when it comes to like thinking about the intersection between technology and the outdoor environment. So I don't work for Apple, but I heard about this feature on the Apple Watch, which I thought was cool, which is called the fall detection feature. And essentially what it does is it detects if you've had a hard fall when you're wearing your watch. And if it does, it taps you on the wrist, it kind of sounds an alarm, displays an alert, and you could either choose to contact emergency services based off of it saying, hey, are you okay? Or you could basically dismiss it. But if it detects that you've been immobile, so you don't respond to these prompts, then I think after about a minute, they'll actually call emergency services on your behalf and also let your emergency contacts know where you're at and the fact that emergency services have been activated. Of course, that only works if you have, reception and this is able to actually communicate with the outside world. But, on some of the front country hikes, perhaps maybe even like a mountain bike setting, this might actually work in terms of being able to communicate your whereabouts to the right people. And for things that are, for things that are a little bit less, where you have less of an option to communicate because you might not have reception, the ABC watch is popular amongst folks who are more like hiker or backcountry hikers, mountaineers, things like that, because an ABC watch has different tools that they could use for planning as well as navigation. So essentially ABC is just a type of watch. It is ones that have altimeters, barometers, and compasses. And so the example here is the Garmin Fenix, but there's a lot of these fitness watches now that have, all three features. And essentially, it allows you to measure your altitude, which is a helpful navigational tool, identifying where you are on trail or on the mountain, because then you know your elevation relative to all that. The barometer helps identify pressure changes. So it is indicative of possibly bad weather on its way. And then a compass, of course, can be used for navigation. This isn't to say that it's better or should replace your actual compass, but it is a good backup, or there's some redundancy there in terms of having these tech tools in addition to the 10 essentials that you should be bringing anyway. Same thing with phone applications. So you're probably familiar with one or all of these in terms of being able to use them as a backup navigation tool, hopefully. So essentially, you can get topographic maps on these applications. You can have GPS enabled on them, so you know where you are relative to the map. You could have other people's tracks and download them in advance, so you could see where you are relative to other people's tracks, and it could recommend hikes to you. These apps, I believe Peak Bagger is free, and there's a cost for certain versions of Gaia and Hiking Project. So they have different features and functionality, but they do have some sort of like GPS tracking mechanism. A couple of things to note: that drains your battery, so you should probably consider having some sort of backup, phone charger or something if you're going to be running these apps constantly. But also, again, if you run out of battery, or even if it just gets too cold and your phone doesn't turn on, then all you've got is this brick that can't do anything for you. So again, critical to have a map and compass, but these phone applications do provide some redundancy. And what's interesting is when you see kind of this intersection between like products that have been used in the hiking and outdoor space mixed with tech. So example, it's not so much outdoor, but like you've got the Peloton bike, but then you also have the app, right? And in this case, Road ID is a product that's been out there for a while in terms of keeping your physical or keeping your emergency contact information on your person in the event that something goes wrong. So I initially heard about Road ID through another WTC instructor who's also a first responder. And she was saying that this is pretty good because, you know, you just have it on your body in case you're unconscious and you're found on the trail, or you're unconscious and you're at the hospital and they need to know, you know, who your emergency contact is, or if you have any allergies, or you know, what your blood type is. You could have that essentially on a bracelet. They also have like necklaces and shoe tabs and stuff. So pretty like low profile items that you could have with you that have that information readily available, just in case, let's say you have your, you know, emergency info, but it's in your backpack and that got separated from you. To have that on your person is pretty critical. So anyway, so Road ID, you know, existed as a product for a while, but more recently they've been doing some stuff in the tech space. So they now have the ability for you to upload your online profile so that you could add, you know, this is just like 6 lines of text, but you could add things like your medications, your past surgeries, family history, stuff like that. You could actually upload that information somewhere, and then there's a code on the back of this that if the first responder knew to look, then they could actually look up additional information about you rather than what's just on your Road ID. They also have like an app. It's called, I think, GPS Tracker and Emergency Notifications. And it's kind of like the Apple Watch that I mentioned earlier, where it has things like real-time location sharing, accident sensing, where it sends notifications to your emergency contacts if it thinks you fell. And it also has like a one-touch SOS. But again, those things work if you have, you know, some level of reception or ability to communicate with the outside world. So, you know, just interesting to see the evolution of tech and how it's impacted hiking and whatnot. And just a quick note, kind of cool. So I reached out to Road ID and said, hey, I'm doing this, you know, this training seminar on hiking safety, you know, could you kind of hook me up? And so they did. They I partnered up with them. We are giving away a $50 gift card, which is enough to purchase any of Road ID's products. So if you go to my Instagram page, it's Rose to Adventure. There's a raffle, basically a raffle that's being run right now, giveaway promotion, and it'll go through the end of tomorrow. So if you are interested, definitely check that out because it's kind of cool that I get to give one away thanks to this webinar. But just a quick note just on the topic of social media. So there's obviously good and bad with social media, as we're all aware. You know, things like this giveaway or, you know, this particular webinar, which you may have heard about through Facebook. Like there's definitely a lot of opportunities to learn more about, you know, hiking safely or being in the outdoors and, you know, getting into more technical things like that. That's a lot of that information is available out there now. There's a lot of nonprofit organizations, including the Sierra Club, providing free training webinars such as this. You also have information that's gone viral that's actually helped with some search and rescues. I think Montrose could speak to it in more detail, but I think there's this one instance where a guy posted a selfie and it was like the last thing that he got out to his friend or something like that. And with the background information in the selfie, it like went viral. People like looked at the photo and eventually figured out where he was, and that helped inform that search and rescue. So that's, you know, that's pretty cool. And that helps, you know, partly thanks to social media where that information is, you know, quickly getting dispersed. And then last but not least, there's also crowdsourcing. So, you know, we talked about making sure you do your due diligence and your homework in advance and when planning a trip and before going out. And I think, you know, there's obviously websites that you could go to check, you know, weather and conditions and things like that. But oftentimes, you know, if there's like, is there snow in the shoe in this, like on this mountain in the Sierras? Like I might go to a Facebook page dedicated to the Sierras and ask that question. And it's not unusual that someone's been there, you know, within the past week that could tell me about the conditions. So I could better prepare in terms of having the right tools to be able to go out there and not get myself in trouble. So, you know, just to kind of step back from all this, you know, technology is both good and bad, as you can imagine. You know, I think it's great that there's a lot of tools that kind of enhance our outdoor experience and can help, you know, add that extra element of safety. But then also, I think on the flip side, sometimes you get people who are a little bit overconfident that they depend too much on their phones which becomes a problem, if they're 100% dependent on it and it goes out, then you got a brick and you've got no recourse. So definitely have the 10 essentials, be prepared, but you could definitely have like technology as a backup or an extra level of redundancy.
Thank you, Lisa. That was very, very informative. And again, we will have this information available as the recording link after the presentation. So you can go back and you can watch it again and you can take notes if you haven't. We do have 2 more pages of my questions, so I want to move through them pretty quickly. I'd like to bring David in and ask David. David is a hike leader. David, when participants are on an outing, whether it's a Sierra Club or a meetup, things can go wrong. So what would you suggest as the do's and don'ts to help participants stay safe?
Okay. But good evening, everybody. I have bad knees and a bad back, and the bad back keeps me from doing the very strenuous outings because I can't carry a backpack more than 25 pounds. And if you talk about, when you hear about bringing the water, that's a lot of weight. So that keeps me out of doing the leader, but I have led several hundred trips for the Sierra Club, and a lot of them for the 100 Peak section. I've led the list 2 times, for those of you who may know from way back. And I wanted to talk about some of the things that can go wrong. And the first thing is, let's say you want to go on a hike and you're not quite sure. You haven't hiked with this leader before. You don't know what he's going to do or she's going to do. How do you know you can do it? And, when it says the word moderate, the moderate usually means in a write-up 1,000 feet of gain an hour. Strenuous can be anywhere from, it can be up as high as 2,000 feet of gain an hour. An easy hike is looking at 500 to 700 feet of gain an hour. So you should have an idea of how long it takes you to climb 1,000 feet of gain. If you look at an outing that says this is 4,000 feet of gain, you shouldn't go on that if you don't know how long it takes you to do 1,000 feet of gain. So one of the things, if you don't know the leader, is to ask, how long are you going to take to do this hike, and divide it by, how many hours they say it's going to take. That gives you an idea of how you qualify. And the reason why this is so important is if you're not able to keep up with the group, that puts the whole group at risk. And if you're too fast for the group, if you're thinking you're going to go on a strenuous conditioning hikes and you've got a group of beginners, you're going to want to go ahead, and that creates problems. And I'll talk about that a little bit. So it's very important to have that, if you don't know the leader and you don't know, is to have that conversation so that they're aware of what your capabilities are and you can decide if it's an appropriate trip for you. And I want to talk about, paying attention on a trip. I did an experiment early in my leader days. This was a trail hike. I'm an I-rated leader, so a lot of cross-country hikes, a whole different scenario. But this was a trail hike, and what we did is we walked up a trail, we crossed one road, and we got to a campsite and turned right into the campsite. So I thought I would do an experiment on the way back. And on the way back, we stopped at left the campground where we're having the picnic, got to the trail, and I asked people to point to which way they thought we should go to get back to the cars. And half the people pointed left and half the people pointed right. Which tells me, obviously if you turn right into the campground, you're going to turn left when you leave. And then I asked the same question when we got to I stopped the group when we got to the road that the trail crossed, and I say, which way should we go? Should we go left, straight, or right? And it was a little better. About 3/4 of the people knew we should go straight, but a lot of people, it was it went downhill to the right, and they all thought they should turn right because it was a better downhill than taking the trail, which was not as steep. So, you know, one of the things that's important if you're in an outing, even if you're not the leader, is you need to be aware of what's happening, because things can happen. And I'll talk about that. You can, you know, if you get the group strings out a little bit, you know, turn around when you come to any kind of junction, or if you're going cross country, do it frequently. Turn around and look behind you. What you see when you go up is totally different than what you see when you go down. And that look behind you can make the difference of spending the night out in the wilderness while people are looking for you, or you know, being able to get out yourself. And that happens, you know, that's true if you're in a group or alone. You know, and just so you got, the reason this is so important, if you go up a mountain, the ridges converge. So all the ridges end up at the top, and then you're at the top and it's time to go down. And maybe you have a GPS or a compass and it tells you to go a certain direction. You know, well, if you haven't looked at the direction you're taking going up, you won't know which direction to go down. When that ridge splits in two, it can make the difference of ending in a cliff where you're going to have to backpack back. You're going to have to hike back up the mountain and then take the other ridge, which could be more than you're able to do. So having that backwards look is very important. And the other thing is getting separated from your group. These are some scenarios I've seen happen, and you know, and I'm talking trail right now, but I'll talk a little bit about cross country. Somebody in a group decides to take a split break. Now, split break is, for those of you who don't know, is when the men go one way and the women go the other way, because there's no facilities on the trail. They decide to take a split break, but they don't tell anybody. So they disappear off because you don't want to be seen. They disappear off in the side, and the sweep of the group comes on by and doesn't see anybody and just keeps on hiking. And you get to where the trails are, and you look and you count the people, and there's somebody missing. And that's a problem, because maybe they don't know which way to go, and just for the same reason. So that's one of the common things that happens. I got separated from an outing. I was at top of a peak, and I was tired, and I laid down and fell asleep, and I woke up and I was the only one on the summit. They didn't see me because I was behind a rock. So, you know, these things, you know, make sure you tell one of the people in charge what you're doing is very important. This is even more important when you do a cross-country hike. You know, you don't have a trail and you're going up a hill, or you're going down a hill, whichever way you're going, and you stop to get a drink of water, and you can't see the people in your group ahead of you. This can happen real easily, especially if it's a wooded slope or there's lots of big rocks. And, you know, one of the last thing we want to do is make ourselves stand out. But that's the time, as soon as you can't see the people in your group going cross country. You know, and Sierra Club people, you know, we have, even in spite of all the training we have to look for people, it just takes a second for that gap to widen where you can't see us and we can't see you. As soon as you don't see the people in front of you, you need to yell. You don't want to yell, because if you raise your voice, you know, people might look at you funny, but you have to tell the people in front of you, you don't know where they are. Because otherwise, you know, it can be, even if they find you, it can be a couple hours lost, and the objective of the trip is gone. It's better to do that yelling and have the group stop and get back together. Real easy to do. And you know, I think that's a very important thing to do, is just to maintain that group cohesiveness. Some leaders, you know, Sierra Club leaders are better, but not perfect at keeping groups together. But you could go on another hike, a meetup group or something, and the leader You know, they don't have a leader in a suite. Maybe they just have a leader. So there's nobody responsible. You have to make sure you're keeping together with the group. So these are things to do. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about how much water to bring. Because you can never have too much water. You know, you've heard everybody else talk about this. You know, we might put in a write-up, you know, bring 2 liters of water. Bringing that extra liter won't hurt, you know, if you're able to carry it. And what I always did is I carried the water into the car, and before I started hiking, I chugged a liter of water. And I carried it, and so it was much easier to carry that way instead of in the backpack. But those are things to think about. But the most important is that looking behind you all the time, so you know where you are, and staying with the group.
Thank you, David. You know,
Yeah.
these are very valuable observations from, you know, someone who's led hikes. And, you know, many of these things I would never have thought to do. So
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you very much for presenting them.
Let me add one more thing. Remember I said, you know, the people didn't know which way to go. And, you know, when I talked about people being too fast for the group, and you may have seen this on a hike, and people start asking, can I sign out early and go back on my own? And, you know, if you, let's say you're on a hike and all the strong people sign out. Hopefully they know how to get back, but, you know, as I've said, but if everybody that's strong signs out and somebody has trouble on the hike, who's left to help the leader with those few people that are struggling? You know, maybe you could have stayed and helped carry their backpacks or things like that. So when you ask to sign out and the leader says, no, you can't sign out, that's why we say that. And, you know, that's one of the things to respect.
And it's accountability too,
Yeah.
you know. All right. Thank you, David. Thank you very much for your perspective. We're going to talk about rescue now, and I'm going to pose a question back to Janet from Montrose Search and Rescue. Janet, you know, we heard about that family in Mariposa who sadly were not able to get help when they needed it. And can you talk a little about what the circumstances were that caused their untimely death? And that was the couple and their baby and their dog up in near Yosemite.
You know, Pat, I don't have all the specifics on that. I think Steve was going to address that tonight.
Okay. Steve?
Yeah, so, you know, the Sheriff's Department put out a public report that I read last week. They had gained some new information by actually reading the victims' cell phones, so they could see where calls and texts were attempted, but didn't actually go through the network. So, you know, without getting into the horrific circumstances, there are some things I think that we can take away from that. And one of them on the technology side is they texted friends and they attempted to call people that they thought could help them, but they never called 911. So nowhere in that whole series of several hours where they knew they were in trouble and they were trying to reach out for help, did they call 911. And one thing to remember is, yes, cell phone is very spotty. You can climb to a higher location, or you can even move from one location to another and potentially get cell service. But there's a thing called the 12-second rule, where basically if I belong to carrier number 1 and they don't have service there, carrier number 2 will pick up my 911 call. So for example, I'm a T-Mobile customer. If I don't have T-Mobile service, I could have called 911, and if there was an AT&T tower within range, it would have grabbed my call and it would have transferred that call to 911. So just because you have no bars and just because you can't call your friend does not always mean that you can't get a call out. And in this case, there was never an attempt, you know, to call 911. And And again, we do see people in trouble. The old adage was most people will hike downhill. So if we're looking for a lost person, we're looking for downhill. But since the advent of cell phones, a new wrinkle is people hike uphill to try to get cell phone service. And, I don't know what attempts, were made on their behalf. Just a very unfortunate, situation. And I think Janet was going to talk a little bit about the medical, conditions and what to do about that. But just from a technology standpoint, great to try and call a friend. We get a lot of 911 calls who is a friend of a hiker saying, my friend has texted me and he's here and he's in trouble, that kind of thing. But don't be afraid to call 911. And there are technically times where that might work, where you can't get a call out, but a 911 call will get out. So
Yes, thank you, Steve. Janet, I think the condition that was responsible for their death, was it hyperthermia, which is related to heat exhaustion? I believe, well, that is what was, as opposed to hypothermia, which is related to the cold. Could you speak about that? Because when I was researching that this evening, it said temperatures were as high as 108 degrees in the section where they were hiking.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I'm not that familiar with the story, but I do believe it was hyperthermia that they succumbed to, and I'm not sure if they were hiking around the whole time or if they were stationary, but and I believe the Sierra Club is trained in first aid for heat emergencies, correct?
Yes, and
think that
Jane's
was-
going to speak about that in a minute.
Okay. Yeah, so I don't want to overstep that or over talk about what you guys are trained on as far as that.
No,
And-
the question I'm posing to you is, can you tell us what the symptoms of hypothermia are?
Hyperthermia?
Yes.
Well, you can experience it in 3 different stages. And again, I don't want to be teaching beyond what you guys learn, but I do believe first aid knows about stage 1, where people can get heat cramps just from being exertional in the heat. And then you move into your heat exhaustion, where you experience a little more severe symptoms. You might get headaches, or you might get confused. You might be profusely sweating. And then you can move on to a real medical emergency, which would be heat stroke. That's just a progression of your exhaustion, where you continue to have the headaches and the exhaustion. You can have a loss of consciousness. Your body can get so hot that it can lead to some brain swelling, and you can have seizures. So you become so dehydrated that your skin is actually dry because you're just so dehydrated you can't sweat anymore. So those would be kind of the progressive symptoms of that.
And what are the symptoms on the other side, hypothermia from the cold?
Hypothermia, that one would be probably best described by Cindy, our team member who went through it. She could probably give you some really great ones, but just the cold and the continued cold, if you become wet, and the shivering, just another progression in the opposite way of your body not being able to control your temperature.
Okay. Thank you very much for giving us a little more information on that. What I'm going to ask Jane about now, and Jane is the Leadership Training Committee co-chair. So the Sierra Club has been requiring first aid training of its leaders since 1973, but isn't there something new that is now required, where people who are participating in hikes have to sign a liability form to go on hikes, or outings, I should say?
Oh, well, okay. First of all, the requirement for an outings leader for the Sierra Club has gone through all kinds of stages. And there has always been in place some kind of first aid requirement. I mean, and there's different levels of that requirement. There's wilderness first aid for cross-country trips and the higher levels of the outing that we conduct. But as far as participants, there is some newer things that really don't relate specifically to first aid. What it does relate to is that a leader is going to be asking participants who go on hikes or trips that are defined as backcountry trips, that the participants will fill out a medical form. And the medical form itself, right now, the form itself is, well, we have a lot of opinions about it. It's not a wonderful document, but the impulse there is to have the leaders know more about the conditions or the underlying conditions or allergies and EpiPens and such that a participant has before they actually embark on the trip. Now, leaders have always been trained to ask participants at the trailhead, if you have any conditions you think are relevant to this outing, please tell me privately. And folks would then say, oh, I'm allergic to bees or peanuts or whatever, or I have some kind of heart thing, or I'm on a special diet. So what used to be handled in a more private way, informal way, is now more formal. And it really only applies to outings that go into, well, you would say into the mountains. I live in the Santa Monicas, and many of the hikes that go up here would ultimately require a medical form. It is not the same as a liability waiver. We've always required folks to sign a participant agreement of some kind, a waiver form called a sign-in sheet, which they can sign out. It's the medical form that's newer that does affect participants, and we have a lot of range of opinions on this. Some folks are actually using it and are okay with it. Participants carry it in their packs. You know, it's a work in progress. It's not perfect. A lot of us are not quite happy with it, but it's an attempt to get a better handle on who the participants are.
I see. Okay. Now, I know that you recently recorded a seminar on first aid from Steve Schuster.
Well, it was only, it was a seminar for the whole training, and there was a part of it on first aid, sorry.
I see, okay. And so that is available as a separate recording, should someone be interested in more information on that?
You know, I'm going to discuss that with Steve Schuster, who is our Wilderness First Aid course. That is his course that he teaches, but he's also our first aid chair. I'm in fact going to see if he'd like to have it available on his website, just this section. And what's interesting is he goes through the levels of hypothermia and hyperthermia. So it could be informative.
I think it's very important for people who are on this call to know what the symptoms are, because, you know, as we said in the beginning, we experience very hot temperatures and also very cold temperatures in the Angeles Forest, in the mountain, the higher elevations. And it's important for people to recognize both hypothermia and hyperthermia symptoms, which are very different. Doug, did you want to add something to this discussion?
Yes, I did. It can happen to anyone. In fact, Janet and I were on a search and rescue for a person off of San Gorgonio, and our assignment was to go up from the Whitewater region in the desert. And it was pretty hot. It was early in the year, but still very hot. And we hadn't gotten very far, maybe a mile, when Janet got overheated, despite doing everything right, being hydrated, seeking shade when we could, although there wasn't much shade out in the desert. But we ended up having to cancel because she was showing early signs and recognized them. So the self-awareness is very valuable, and she really did well in recognizing them and doing something about it. We ended up having her get a soak in the Whitewater River. It's not much of a river, but it's a cool stream, which helped her symptoms. But it could very well have gone worse if she hadn't recognized that and kept going, despite her hyperthermia symptoms. So self-awareness is a valuable part of that whole heat emergency scenario.
And also, I think as part of that is just knowing that there's no shame if you can't complete a hike. And you're not failing, you're just taking care of yourself if you're experiencing some discomfort and some symptoms. Jane, did you want to say something?
I do. I want to say something regarding summer hiking because where I am here in the Santa Monica's, it's astounding to me that people think because it's near the ocean that it's got to be cooler. I have been on hikes where people collapsed, and I've seen the Malibu search and rescue folks have to handle this. So this is one of the great things about being able to educate people on the issues of heat. I mean, yeah, in the cold months, we want to focus on that, but we're heading into hotter climates. Things are getting hotter. And it's a misconception that if you're somewhere near the ocean, it's going to be cooler. It's not.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. And yes, with climate change, things are getting hotter. So we all better be aware of what the symptoms are. So now we're going to talk about solutions. Ultimately, the goal here is to encourage people to go out and enjoy the outdoors, not to keep you from enjoying it, but just to prevent some of the rescues, some of the need for rescues out there on the trails. And of course, we want to obtain 0 deaths, if at all possible, as a result of people being more prepared and having less accidents. So, Lisa, I'm going to turn back to you. What can people do to better educate themselves?
Sure, absolutely. Hopefully, share screen, you can see it? A little
Yes.
more seamless this time. Okay, okay. So as I mentioned earlier, I am an instructor with the Wilderness Travel course, and a lot of the concepts that were discussed today, not just by myself, but others on this call, is reinforced and taught in more depth through WTC. It's a 10-week course, so obviously you get a lot more training both in the classroom as well as out in the field. And it definitely, the training in this course and others like it, frankly, can help minimize some of the potential safety and emergency issues that we discussed today. And so you see some of the main reasons why people take the course. And I'd say number 2 and number 5 here. So how to stay found, and also finding new friends and hobbies who you can do this with. Those are the top 2 reasons why people take the course. And if you think about kind of thematically tying back to what we started with, being able to stay found is a very good way to kind of ensure your safety. And also, having friends who you can do this with helps ensure that, maybe with more heads, you can actually know where you are because there's more knowledge amongst, the group. And also, you're not hiking alone. So if you do get injured, perhaps someone could go for help on your behalf because you have that extra person with you. So, that's a couple of reasons why people take WTC, and it's definitely a good place for it. So WTC is offered January through March. So we are kind of wrapping up this year's course, and it's, as I mentioned, it's a 10-week course. We meet 10 weeknights, and then we do every other weekend, we do an outing, starting with a full day hike, going into Joshua Tree, doing a snow day hike, and then eventually we go to the Sierras. And as far as this year, we are wrapping up. But if you are interested at all in learning more, definitely go to the WTC website, which is listed at the bottom. And there's a contact us page, and you can fill out the form basically saying, hey, please notify me the next time you guys are running this course. And once we have the 2023 dates up, we could go ahead and contact you with that. But if you're local to Southern California, we offer it in 3 different areas: San Gabriel Valley, West LA, South Bay, Long Beach, and Orange County. So if you're local, please do check it out. But there are other training opportunities. If you're not in this area, or if you want to kind of take it beyond what you may have learned at WTC, you may be a past student or a current student. There's other courses. Wilderness First Aid is a fantastic one. Wilderness First Responder, Avalanche one, especially if you like going into areas with snow. Knowing what the risks are there, and that kind of takes it to the next level. But I think all this additional training is good because it's not just about, a lot of it we focus on how do you keep yourself safe, but there's also if you encountered someone else in the wilderness and they needed help, would you be able to help them? I mean, I'm a civilian. I'm not part of SAR, though Doug is trying to recruit me. But I'm not part of SAR. But I've been in a scenario where, with the tools and knowledge that I gained in the wilderness first aid, I was able to help someone and get them safely off a mountain. Without that training, I might have been less comfortable doing that, because one of the first things you learn, even in basic first aid, is you want to make sure the scene is safe, and you want to make sure that you don't add to the problem, right? So you don't want to put yourself at risk so that SAR has to rescue 2 people or 3 people when assisting others. So if we have the right training and the right tools, then you can actually help others, and maybe perhaps one less call is made out to SAR, you're putting them at less risk, and you could help others. So additional training is good both for yourself and potentially for others you meet out in the field. So whether it's WTC or another course, I highly recommend getting additional training and going more in depth to some of these topics we covered tonight.
Thank you. And I know David's going to add something, but David, before I tap into your additional information, is there anyone from Montrose Search and Rescue that has any additional things to add on how to be better informed? And you can just jump right in, Doug, if you want.
Okay. Well, I don't really have any more to add to that. I think that Lisa has covered pretty thoroughly. I will repeat what has been said already, and that is that when you become informed, check your sources, make sure they're reliable, and try to rely on several sources, because the conditions do change, and if you're not aware of them, that can cause a problem.
Thank you. Steve?
I just had something I wanted to mention real quick, and that is when Lisa was talking about the 10 essentials, I keep a little nylon bag within my pack that is about the size of a small soup can and probably weighs 10 ounces. And that has my 10 essentials in it. So, my compass, my signal mirror, in my case, a cigarette lighter instead of matches. I like a cigarette lighter. It lasts for a long time. All of those things, they're not big items. An LED flashlight, and any one of those things, in accidents and situations with bad outcomes, we see a whole series of potentially mistakes. They call it the Swiss cheese theory of accidents. If you can remove any one of those things from an accident, the accident doesn't happen, right? So, if the driver stops at the stop sign, or if this person's not speeding, or if that person used their blinker or whatever, it's the same with hiking. If you had a flashlight or you had a way of making a fire, whether it's a signal fire or a warming fire, all of those things can make a huge difference, and they're just not that much. So even people who pack extra extra-light, I have an emergency bivy sack. It's about the size of a large can of soup, and my small 10-pack is about the size of a small can of soup, and they weigh a lot less. And it's just nothing to throw them in your pack and to have them. And
Just
what a
in
difference
case.
it makes.
Yep.
I keep a pocket knife in there, and it just makes a big difference when you have nothing. I also keep a tea bag in there, so I can warm some water and just shove a tea bag in my water bottle. So anyway, just some tips.
Good pointers. With that, I'm going to turn it back to David. I know you had some additional thoughts you wanted to add.
Yes, I want hikers in general, we're goal-oriented people. We want to get to the top of a mountain. We want to get to the end of a trail. We plan these hikes and we have that goal in mind. And because we're goal-oriented, we don't want, a little bit of discomfort when you're hiking. Your muscles may ache. You just keep on going. And this is where people, I think, get into a lot of trouble is that fixation on a goal. I mean, if you look at extremes, look at the when people analyze why people die on Mount Everest, and it's all because they didn't turn back when they should have turned back. That's almost always, or somebody in the group didn't turn back and they impeded somebody else. And so that's, when you plan this goal, and it goes back to when people are talking about planning. When you plan your hike, one of the things you should think about as part of your planning, you want to plan your route, you want to plan, how long it's going to take you. You also want to think about, when should I not go? So I know we talked about, do you really need to climb that peak when it's 100 degrees out, or hotter? If it's snowing, do you really need to go and do this? The mountain will still be there. The mountain will be there longer than we're going to be here. You can come back and get it and hike it another day. And I think that mental attitude of knowing, because, I can think back to all the times I've had problems on a hike, and they all have to do with, I have that goal, I want to go do it, and then I get into trouble. And when I hear about other people, it's they had a peak, and it's, so what if it's 100 degrees? I'm going to hike it anyhow. And next thing you know, they're in the newspaper. So.
Hey, Dave,
Yeah.
and Pat, I
Yes.
don't want to interrupt, but we just got an emergency call.
Oh,
Thank
no.
you. I think our presentation is done. Where are you off to?
I believe it's up by Switzer Falls.
Oh, no.
Okay, listen, be safe. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Janet, and thank you, Cynthia. I know we have some questions. If anybody else wants to hang around for a little bit longer for David to, read the questions, that would be fine. But you go help whoever needs your help.
You got somebody,
precedence.
it's cold out at night. You need to go help them.
Isn't it ironic? It happened
Yeah.
right in the middle of our presentation.
Yes.
So, David, what are your thoughts? Shall we? Do the
Yeah, I
question and
continue,
answer?
and if somebody here knows the answer, we can answer it. Otherwise, we'll remember the questions and we can get back to you if nobody knows. We talked about mirrors. What about whistles? Is that a good thing to carry?
And who's that addressed to?
It's just a general question for safety.
Well, I know the rescue that I was a part of, it was specifically because I was able to find him vocally, he yelled. So I think a whistle would have been just as effective. So I think there are scenarios, especially if there are people around, that it could help. Of course, if there are no people around, it's not going to be useful.
Okay.
Sorry, Doug, you have your hand
think-
raised. I didn't mean to
Yeah.
interrupt. I just called
That's
in when I
nice.
started talking.
I was just going to add to that. Well, first of all, I'm the only one already in uniform, so I'm ahead of Janet and Steve on this call, so I can stick around a little bit. But
Okay.
on the whistles, it's good to remember the universal sign for distress or emergency is a signal of 3. So if you have 3 campfires, you blow your whistle 3 times, and that it lets people know that you have an emergency. And yes, they are definitely an additional safety device you should have along.
Thank you.
Yeah, while you're still here, Doug, this is a question specifically for you. If you're in a group and you discover you have somebody missing, when should we call 911? Right away, or is there a period of time? What's the timeline on that you would recommend?
Well, I wish I could give you a definite answer, but it does vary. It's nice for search and rescue to have some daylight left when you initiate a search. So if it's getting towards evening and you find somebody's missing, probably better sooner to notify search and rescue than later. On the other hand, we get, in fact, most of our calls are under an hour. That being caused by people immediately calling search and rescue or 911 when they're missing somebody, when it turns out they show up a few minutes later. So if it's a matter of, where they are in the trail and they're just a little slow coming back, you can hold off. But if you suspect it, another thing is that depending on the conditions, if it's snowy, cold, and the person isn't dressed correctly, then, get on the phone immediately and make the report. But in essence, it just depends on the circumstances that you're involved in.
Okay. And another question you might answer, when people hike alone on seldom used trails, what's your insight on that? And what are your record, with the difference between solo hikers and group hikers? is there a difference in the number of rescues or?
I don't believe that there's a difference in the number of injuries, but there is a difference in the number of people being lost. If you have several people helping each other, you're more likely to be able to stay on trail than just relying on one set of eyes. I mean, that's true with in various circumstances, and certainly with hiking and backpacking. The big problem with solo hiking is that if you do have a problem, you're not going to have, unless you have a signaling device or an inReach of that sort of thing, no one's going to know that you're having a problem for quite a bit of time until you don't show up when you're supposed to. And even in that instance, if you haven't let somebody know, it can be a long time before people start looking for you. So the recommendation of search and rescue is don't hike alone. I think all of my cohorts from search and rescue are gone, so I'll reveal a secret. I enjoy hiking alone. I've done a lot of things in remote areas on my own. It just adds to me to the experience. But it's an additional risk, and you have to be willing to accept that. And it's a little more feasible now with the signaling devices. But even then, if you're by yourself and you take a fall, even if someone knows where you are and you can get the signaling device off, it's going to take a long time for people to get to you. So it's just it's something you have to accept the risk, and if you're comfortable with, do it, but recognize the risk that you may be delayed in getting rescue, and you may be lost or disoriented when you wouldn't have been if you had other people with you.
Okay, that's good. Do you have time for one more question?
I certainly do.
Okay, what are the typical SAR rescue times in local mountains? You're doing it right now. From when you receive the call to when you're ready, when you're on site, what is that going to take?
Well, it'll probably take, this one's at Switzer's Falls, which is not too far up Angeles Crest from Crescenta Valley Station. So it'll probably take at most 30 minutes for people to go from the station to the trailhead. And I suspect that they're probably at the falls or falling down the falls, and that would take another 30 minutes to get down there and situated with the victim. So that's a pretty fast response time to that location because it's close to our station. But many of our calls are canceled before we get out of the station. As I just pointed out, people call quickly and then the person shows up, so there's no need for rescue. And they can go on the other side for days, especially instances where we don't know particularly where they are, what route they took, or conditions are bad, such as snowy conditions in the Mount Waterman area without the trails. It was a major effort to cover that area because there was no particularly logical area to look. But I would say on average, most of our calls are resolved within 4 hours.
Okay. Thank you. And we have a question about elevation sickness, altitude sickness. And how do you recognize, this could just be for anybody, WTC or search and rescue, how do you know that you have altitude sickness, or how do you know that somebody else has altitude sickness? And what do you do? What's immediate, and what do you do when you see altitude sickness? So anybody who wants to answer?
Doug's got his
Doug,
hand
take
up.
it. He has his hand raised. I think he's the most medically trained on this call.
Well, this is an easy one. If you have it, the treatment is to go to a lower elevation. As soon as you notice symptoms, just go downhill. There are medications you can take for a prophylactic measure. I think it's called Diamox, but even that doesn't make it bulletproof that you won't get altitude sickness. So the symptoms can, there's two basic types, pulmonary edema, cerebral edema, which is basically fluid in the lungs and swelling in the brain due to fluid accumulation. Of course, both are serious. The cerebral brain issue of greater severity, because not only do you lose, you lose your cognitive abilities, and if you're in a high altitude situation, chances are you need your mind in order to get to safety. So coughing, fluid in the lungs, then becomes confusion. People spit up blood when they're in severe states, and if they have what they call the mumbles, I think it is, for both cold emergencies in high altitude. They can't speak properly. They slur their words. They lose their coordination and that type of thing. So when you see those and you're at that altitude, the best solution is to get down as quickly as you possible to a lower elevation.
Okay.
A quick point about Diamox, while it does help with altitude for some people, it also dehydrates you. So there's like this fine balancing act between like taking enough Diamox, but also making sure you're hydrated enough. Because I know people who've actually had to turn around because they were so dehydrated. So just, you have to talk to your doctor anyway to get Diamox. So that's just a quick note.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a diuretic. Yeah.
No. Well, I think that's the last question. We do have one comment that is so informative. Thank you. And a few more in chat. Woohoo WTC, and great. Thank you so much. And so, you know, that's very good. Well, we will have a recording. It will take a couple days to process and send that link out. Pat, do you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, I just want to thank all of our speakers tonight for being so well prepared for questions. And also thank you to all our people who showed up to listen in on this webinar. Please share the information when you get the link. Share it to as many friends as you can because it might save somebody's life. And with that, I hope you all have safe hiking wherever you go.
Pat, may I add one thing?
Yes.
Sure.
I'd just like to point out that this is an example. We have a call this evening, which we'll go out on. But for last year, 138 calls amounts to one every 2 or 3 days.
Exactly.
And obviously, well, we have 23 members on our team. Based on that, obviously, we can use more people. So if anybody is interested in getting involved in search and rescue, please reach out to the Crescenta Valley Station, Sheriff Station, or myself, and we can get you information. And that gives us a little more relief and not feeling compelled to go on each and every call we get. And thank you for the opportunity to be with you this evening.
Absolutely. And, you know, we hope you'll use this link as well to, you know, promote your presentation to as many people as you can. I'll get it out there so we can help more people become informed. Thank you, everyone. It's looking like we may do this every year.
Yes.
If you're willing.
It'd be nice not to have to report any fatalities
Yes.
next year.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. I hope you all have a
Bye,
good night.
everybody.
Take care. Bye.